Yeah, I'm going to present something about XSpec today. Just to give you an outline of what I'm going to present, I'm going to give you a very quick introduction. I suppose there will be people in the audience who are already users of XSpec, other people who might have heard of it, other people who never heard of it and might want to try it. So I hope I'm going to not bore those who already know about XSpec and give a very quick tutorial just to get everybody up to speed with XSpec. I'm going to then present the new features that were introduced with XSpec version 0.5, and then I'm going to finish with how you can contribute to this open source project. But first, just to introduce myself, I work at Oxford University Press, although what I'm presenting today is not really strictly related to what I do daily these days at Oxford University Press. It's a bit of a side project for me. I'm one of the co-maintainers of XSpec, and I'm particularly interested in DevOps topics. This is why my interest for testing and XSpec. I also help co-organize a DevOps meetup in Oxford if there are people interested in a DevOps subject with maybe a DevOps story, or they know some people who could actually come and speak at this event. Please come and talk to me, as we are always looking for speakers with interesting stories. So enough of me. Let's move to XSpec. So if you never heard of XSpec before, XSpec is an open source unit test and behavior-driven development framework for XSLT, for XQuery, and Schematron. I will go into the Schematron part towards the end, as this is a new feature that has been added very recently. So XSpec version 0.5 was released in January 2017, is available on GitHub, and has also been included, this latest version, in the latest version of Oxygen 19. Before I start with XSpec, I would like just to highlight why it is important testing your code. I think in 2017 this should be obvious, to most people. But on the other hand, I really feel that there aren't really many testing tools for XML technologies in general when you compare it to other programming languages. So really, writing tests is a good practice for developers because actually they force developers to write smaller chunks of codes which could be tested, that are easier to maintain, easier to understand, to debug. So they force into this sort of containerized vision of the code, so that you can change small parts and test these small parts, the small units of code. Tests are also self-documentation, and are actually the best way to introduce new people into the code base. Have a look at the test, and you can see how the code is supposed to behave. Test, of course, the major reason of test is to reduce bugs in code, particularly regression bugs. So if you implement a new feature, you want to make sure that all the existing features are not suddenly broken, and you can do this via testing, especially via an automatic test suite. And finally, it has been calculated that unit testing alone, so just unit testing, contributes to removing about 30% of bugs in software. So if I have not convinced you with these points, I hope this excellent strip from the XKCD, slightly revisited, will convince you of another additional reason why you should be testing, so you have a good reason to slack off, basically. So I hope I convince you with this. So where to start? This is often the question when people want to start writing tests and having a test suite. Where do I start? Actually, the best candidates for testing are actually functions, because these are by definition self-contained pieces of code, usually with an input and output. So they are the best, definitely best candidate for writing a test. Name templates are also, very, very, very good candidate for the same reason. And in generally, the best return on investment on writing tests and spending time on writing tests is testing those parts of the code that they actually get called several times. So you rely quite heavily on it. These are where you're going to see the benefit of testing. So just to give an introduction for those who are not familiar with XSpec, I just prepared out from the documentation a couple of examples of how to test an XSLT template or an XQuery. If you're familiar with XSpec, this is just going to be very trivial, so bear with me for that. So in true test-driven development fashion, let's start with a test. So before even writing the code, the XSLT, let's write the test that actually will comply with the specification. So here is a very simple example of basically converting a title element into an H1 element, very trivial. So you will see in the style sheet up here, this is where you basically, in the style sheet attribute, this is where you link your XSpec test with your XSLT. Then you have a scenario with a label, with a human readable description of the test. Typically, the first part of the test, the so-called given condition, given certain conditions, and in this case, you provide a context to your XSLT. It could be in a form of a XML snippet. It could be also, you can add also a file. I'll give you an example later for this, so you can just feed in an XML file. And then in the expect block, you basically have what do you expect the result to be. And you basically put the result of this conversion. So here we are converting a title element into an H1 element. Let's have a look at the XSLT now. And on purpose, I've written an XSLT that doesn't pass the test so that you can see what happens when things go wrong and then how to fix it. So here, write an XSLT, very simple, a match on the title element, but it's converting into an H2 element. So how is the test going to show you that that there is a problem with your XSLT? This is the kind of output that you get. You run XSpec, and then either via Oxygen, or you can run it also via the command line. And this is the type of HTML report that you get typically from the Oxygen output. You will see in the expect results at the bottom, what you expect, what you wrote in your test, and then what the actual result of the transformation is, so that you can see immediately via this diff where the problem is in the output. You can go back to your XSLT, fix that part, and then hopefully your test will pass later and everything will be displayed as green. Note also that the labels are actually really important because they give a human readable description of what the test is supposed to be, and I always recommend to write human readable descriptions so that even non-technical people can understand where the problem might be and why do you need to spend that extra day to fix the tests. XSpec could also be used for testing XQuery. I'm going to give you an example. This time I go the other way around. I start with an XQuery function, very simple one. So you might have already a set of functions that are already there, they're already used, and you want to add tests. That's a typical use case. It's a very simple function in XQuery. What it does is basically takes a string as an argument and then capitalize the first character of the string. Very trivial, very simple. The XSpec test might look like this. So I highlight a couple of things here. This query at attribute. This is where you link your test with the XQuery that you want to test. This is where you create this relationship between the two. As usually, you've got the label. Here we use the call element to call a function, and you can pass a parameter, in this case a string hello. And then in the expect block, you will see the results, so with the first character capitalized. So this is just an example of how you can test XQuery with XSpec. I'm now moving on to the latest release, but I first want to give a sort of a brief history of XSpec, where this project comes from. So XSpec was first created in around 2008. I've done a little bit of archaeology on the web for this slide. It was created by Jenny Tennyson, I think around 2008. And then Jenny presented XSpec at XML Prague 2009. XSpec was then released on Google Code, and Florent Georges then took the ownership of the project and then released version 0.2, 0.3, up to 0.4, and then in 2012 also Oxygen 14, from Oxygen 14 if I remember well, the XSpec started to be included inside the Oxygen editor, which I think it was a massive boost towards using XSpec and making XSpec available to XML developers. Unfortunately, the project didn't have any active development between 2012-2015 until it was moved from Google Code, now defunct, into GitHub. Then in 2016, we start seeing some contribution. I started basically putting some of the bug fixes that I've implemented at work, because yeah, we had a couple of features that didn't work. Find out what was not working in XSpec, fix it, and then I said, just contribute back. And then there are other people who started then contributing pull requests, issues, asking for advice, contributing new features, which was really, really good. And then this culminated into a flower of, yeah, lots of new contribution. And then in January 2017, then we released XSpec version 0.5. These are some of the comments of people that I received yeah, since I got involved with it. And I think it really makes sense when you work in an open source project. You actually get people that use the tool, and actually they tell you what their input is. So I was really happy to see this stuff going on GitHub, on Twitter, and I really value it. To me, it means that there is a reason why this project exists, and there is a use case for this, and people are actually using the tool, and they need the tool, so it needs to be further developed. So I'm now moving towards a new feature of XSpec 0.5. These are just some of the highlights. You will find all the new feature in the official release notes on GitHub. And some of the things I want to highlight is XSLT3 support in XSpec. You can now test XSLT3 style sheets with XSpec. There is JUnit support, particularly useful if you're using continuous integration servers. There is now feature parity between the Windows script and the shell script. So if you run Oxygen via XSpec via the command line, you now have the same features on both operating systems. What was very important for me, it was also to add a test suite to XSpec. You would expect this from a testing framework that actually is tested itself, just practice what you preach, really. And so we introduced this, and I will show you a little bit this. I will mention it later. There are also lots of bug fixes. One particularly I was involved in was the code coverage that has been broken for several years. I'm just going to pick and choose some of this that I want to show you more in detail, but everything is on the release notes. So this is an example of how you would test an XSLT3 style sheet. So in this case, I'm using the inline function in XPath3 in this XSLT3 style sheet. In XSpec, you basically, everything you need to do is to use the XSLT version attribute. By default, XSpec will use XSLT2, but if you specify you want to test an XSLT3 style sheet, just use this attribute, and and it should support XSLT3 testing. This patch was actually provided by Oxygen, and they first integrated it into the version of XSpec, which was on Oxygen at the time. JUnit support, so people might have heard of JUnit. It's probably considered like the grandfather of all testing framework. Is originally from the Java world. And the good thing about JUnit is, first of all, the report in JUnit is XML. And second is understood natively by continuous integration servers like Jenkins. And I'm going to give you an example later on. If you want basically the only thing that you have different in running XSpec with the -J option is that you will have a report also in JUnit if that is your cup of tea, this is what you want. And when you plug it into CI service like Jenkins, you will have for free basically all these nice visualizations. You just put a JUnit file into a specific directory that you specify in Jenkins, and you will have some nice graphs giving you also trends about how your test suite is going, how many tests are failing over time. You get all this basically plugged in for free by simply having a JUnit serialization of the output. Then testing XSpec. This is something I'm I was really keen, because I've seen lots of open source projects actually. Sometimes they don't move on because they are scared to make changes. And this is simply because if you make a change, you're just scared that you're going to break everything that was working before. So how do you solve this problem? How do you accept contributions for people who want to extend this tool, but without breaking it? Well, one of the ways to do this is to implement a test suite, an automatic test suite, so that every time you do a pull request, every time you do a code merge, you actually run the test suite. And every time you add a new feature or every time you fix a bug, you also add a test that is testing the new feature, making sure that it behaves according to the specifications, or fix the bugs according to how the correct specifications should be interpreted. So this was implemented in XSpec. Since the project is on GitHub, so we are using two continuous integration servers that work very well with GitHub projects. One is Travis. People might have heard of Travis. It's mainly for basically testing on Unix-like system. And Appveyor is the equivalent for Windows system. So in this way, we can actually test that the implementation using the batch script for Windows and the implementation using the shell script for Linux and Mac, they actually work together. So every time you do pull request, actually this continuous integration service, they run the test suite, which is very often which is a mix of XSpec tests and shell batch script to test the XSpec, and it gives you the result immediately. So you immediately have a feedback. Within a few minutes, you have a feedback of if you broke something with your commit. And we also have a model that you always initiate a pull request. When the pull request passes all the tests and is approved by someone else, which is not the person who submitted the pull request, then the code is merged into master. So this is a model like a rolling release, if you want. So you can always use the latest version with the latest changes in master, but if you want a more stable version, you just check out the code that was latest release. And I'm going to give you an example of this with the schematron support later on. So if you are interested in integrating XSpec test suites into your XML-based project, there is documentation on the wiki on how to integrate XSpec, typically with Travis. And if you inspect the code on XSpec, because you use these tools itself, then you will find examples on how you can reuse the code. Then I'm going to give you a bonus feature, which is not in XSpec version 0.5, but it's just been introduced, merged into the master branch in, I think it was end of April, beginning of May. So this was provided by Vincent Lizzie, who is a developer in the US. I think it was for Taylors and Francis. And he presented this feature also at the JAX conference in April. And he provided this. You know, someone put on an issue on GitHub. I think it was Andrew who started saying, you know, it would be interesting to have, you know, something for testing schematron. And say, oh, Vincent said, oh, I've got something, and maybe I'll polish a little bit, and then I'll submit it, and then someone else will review it. There were changes, and now this feature is on the master branch of XSpec. There is documentation and tutorials as well, and tests, as you would expect. So I really encourage all. I know there are schematron experts in this room. Please try it out and give it a go. I'm going to give you just a very quick, again, another very trivial example. Let's say you've got this very basic XML document, an article with a title in it. You have this schematron rule, which basically says, gives you this assertion with the ID 8001 that basically an article should have a title. That's your basic assertion. The XSpec test for schematron would look a bit like this. As usual, you've got the attribute, in this case schematron, that links your XSpec test with your schematron rule. Then in this case, you provide a context via a file. It's a bit like the context that I showed you before in a XML snippet. In this case, you provide a file. That's another way of doing it. And in here, use the in this scenario, you basically use the expect not assert, which basically says that an assertion is not thrown when this expect test is run. And this is where you find the link with the rule that you specified in your schematron rule. It's a very simple example here. In the tutorial and in the code base, you find other examples and other ways of basically writing scenarios for schematron rules. So I really encourage schematron geeks to have a look and then play with it and provide feedback. Finally, I just want to highlight this is an open source project. It's available on GitHub. You know, if you want, you can contribute to it. Simplest thing is just to put a star. Seems to be very popular these days on the project. But you can also raise issues if you are a user. You can raise issues about XSpec. If you have developed something or you plan to develop something or you want to fix something that you think is not right, send a pull request. It might take a little bit of time to review it because there is just a limited number of people who are actually doing reviews at the moment. But I really would like to have more people starting contributing, so there would be more people familiar with the code base, and they could actually then provide also code reviews, which are really, really important for the quality of the code. And also because there are lots of technologies involved in it. I'm definitely not an expert in any of this, and this is why it's important to get schematron people to provide schematron support, for example. You can also integrate XSpec in your own projects, XML-based projects, especially if you've got lots of XSLT, XQuery and schematron, and you've got documentation, and really just spread the word about testing in the XML world. Just to finish, to sum up, I hope, I've made you aware of XSpec, if you were not aware of it. Unit test framework for XSLT, XQuery, and schematron. Check out XSpec version 0.5 and just use it, contribute, go to the GitHub page. I've got a couple of bonus things. The first one is an acknowledgement, because I think XSpec wouldn't exist in the current form without these people, I think. So Jenny, she started the project in 2008. Florent was maintaining basically almost alone for many years, and is still contributing, as we did yesterday in the pub. And Tony was really influential, especially during the migration to GitHub. I really appreciated his support. and of course the XSpec community. I haven't finished, actually. I haven't finished because I've got a small video that I want to show you to show you how exciting the XSpec community is. So this small video is basically showing you the contribution on the GitHub repository from beginning of February 2016, about February 2016, till basically yesterday. So it shows you all the commits and all the people who actually contribute and to which part of the code base. So this last 2 minutes, I think I've got a little bit of time. So I'm gonna try to explain it while it runs. So it's a visualization. This is where I started getting involved, beginning of 2016, and I started contributing really. This was the bug fix on the code coverage, for example. And then I started adding some tests. And at some point, I started getting, this was the first contribution from Michelle for, regarding some, test directory for XSpec. Then I continue with, just reviewing some other parts of the code base. This was when Travis was introduced into the code base so that we could run an automatic test suite. And then at the beginning of 2017, then Airquick, which I ignore who is, started contributing, reviewing the Windows batch script, introducing all this. Then Tobias came with some changes into the automatic test suite. Airquick with more adding more tests for Windows. It was really, really influential in what he has done for the feature parity. And then you can see other batch scripts. Then Floron also contributed with the test harness. Then there are, every time you see there is a new test added, there is why every time there's a new feature, a bug fix, a new test. Then we got Radu from Oxygen, who contributed to the RelaxNG schema for XSpec. And then towards the end of April, there is basically an explosion coming from the schematron support from Vincent Lizzi, who provided all this. I added some documentation for schematron support. And then as recent as yesterday, Florent and I, yesterday at the pub, we just added another thing for the base X text harness. So this is just to show you the vitality of this project, in this past 18 months. And it's really, it's all about the community for me. This is an open source project. And I'm not making any money out of this. It's not even part of my daily job nowadays. So I really value if people can actually contribute to this project. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you. If you want to get in touch, best way is to buy me a drink, either caffeinated or alcoholic drink. And you can find the slides at this address, and then check out XSpec. Check out the wiki, there is lots of documentation, and check out in general the XSpec organization, because there is also starting being an ecosystem of tools around XSpec. There is a Maven plugin, there is a plugin for Oxygen for XSpec. So there start being other tools built around XSpec. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandro. Do you have any questions? Stephen?
Why don't you just renumber it to 1.0? Because the numbering does send a message. You should just
I know.
Yeah, you really should.
I heard this on the Inkscape project, which is a wonderful project for graphics, and it's still, I think, at the 0 point, some ridiculous number. I know, but it's a bit of a leap of faith as well for me. I think I would continue with this until it gets so good.
Bite the bullet. Just say we're going to release it. Just do it. Ship it.
Well, it's just a number.
Well, then call it 1.0.
Okay, ready? Maybe next release 1.0?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, absolutely, you must.
Okay, okay.
I would like to echo what Stephen said. We had this problem with JATS. We came out at 0.9, which we needed to do because we were an XSpec, and everybody said, oh, 0.9, you're not ready yet. We've been using XSpec for years. You've got to make it 1.0.
Yeah.
If you don't like making it 1.0, skip that and make it 2.0.
Okay, okay. Yeah, advice taken. I'll run it out the community,
Really
and I'm sure lots of people will agree. Will agree with that. Both of you.
I'd like to ask about the experience of testing with regards to the question of granularity of testing.
Yeah.
What works best? Is it testing a style sheet as a whole, or is it testing individual templates or functions? I've seen bad experience of testing when it was too fine-grained, because it inhibits you from refactoring and changing the code. If you have to change one template to add a parameter, it involves changing 300 tests, then people don't do it. And testing at a larger granularity can give you code that's easier to change. What's your experience?
I totally agree, and I actually think that acceptance tests, end-to-end tests, are actually much more useful than unit tests. So XSpec is a unit testing framework, so it's good for testing XSLT and XQuery. My experience of testing itself, XSpec itself, is actually that the most useful test is a test that actually go from the beginning to the end, because that is really the one that allows you to make sure that you haven't broken the whole thing. And sometimes you don't want to get into the finest details, you just want the broad feature to be tested. So this is from a user point of view that I'm telling. So by my experience of eating my own dog food, as you said yesterday, that actually acceptance tests or integration end-to-end tests are actually much more useful, and it's better spending time in this type of tests rather than testing a single name template that maybe doesn't even get called in the code base. I find it much more useful personally. Florence,
Just to add something on that question. So XSpec started as a behavior-driven development. It was not a unit testing framework. So now you can also test XSLT functions and XQuery functions. But for templates, you do not test templates per se. You test some input document and you test the results. So it's basically you test the old style sheet with some inputs and you test the results.
There's no support for mocking or?
I think you can inject some XSLT so you could override templates. There's no real support for that. It just works, but there's no additional support on that.
You can use a sort of a mock object bias in a way of a context, a little bit like I showed before. You feed this XML in a file or within a context. That is probably the closest thing to the concept of a mock object in object-oriented programming.
Any other questions? Thank you, Sandro.
Thank you.